Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network, all NASCAR all the time. A very special edition of the show for you this week. No, it's not just because we'll head into the championship with 4 drivers vying for NASCAR immortality. We are officially live, so if you're listening to this podcast on Friday, you know some of these numbers, all subject to change. Want to thank all of our loyal Stay Green listeners and viewers for tuning in for the live broadcast to try and bet into some of these markets with us simultaneously. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor, my esteemed colleague and co-host on this magical mystery tour, as we are poised, Worm, to wrap up season 3. And NASCAR at least did not disappoint in the penultimate race of the season at Martinsville. Plenty of drama on the docket for us last Sunday.
I'll tell you what, this signal versus noise thing, you kind of battle the entire year when it comes to sports betting or trying to bet this sport professionally. All of a sudden, I find myself loving it. Like week in and week out, I love the drama. I love the conversations that we're having about Bubba Wallace this week or the Chevys. I think it's fantastic. But again, we have to make sure that we are looking at this from a betting perspective. Okay, if this is going to be the case, if we might see shenanigans next year at Martinsville, how do we make money off it?
I'm going to pistol whip the next son of a bitch who says shenanigans.
Okay, well, anyway, there's so much of it that how do we make money off of it? And how do we make money off of it this week going to Phoenix? I don't know that we can learn a lot from, last week at Martinsville necessarily. However, momentum is something that this 12 team has found. And again, this year, he wins Martinsville. Can he do the same thing last year and repeat?
That's putting it mildly. And for those folks who are tuning in for the Stay Green podcast for the very first time, the first question I'll ask is, where the hell have you been all season long? But we'll break things up as we always do throughout the course of the season. Stage 1, what we saw last week transpire on the track. We'll unpack some of the drama as Chris kind of tipped his hand on a little bit there. Stage 2, we'll preview the final 4 and look at those 4 drivers that are vying to grab the checkered flag or at least finish in front of their compatriots and be crowned NASCAR champion. And then it almost feels like an afterthought, a little bit anticlimactic, Worm, a full race breakdown. But last year, there was all sorts of value to be found in the one car in Ross Chastain. So maybe there's a driver or 2 that are flying under the radar. And then we'll do some best betting at the end of the show with some national books and try and identify a little bit of value. But you mentioned the gambling implications of what we saw. Christopher Bell and William Byron, we waited, 27 minutes? I thought it was the Kentucky Derby all over again with an inquiry there. From a gambling standpoint, you do feel for folks that had Christopher Bell to win the championship at numbers of 3, 4, maybe even higher than that earlier in the year. William Byron punches his ticket. And look, selfishly for us and our listeners that probably have quite a bit of exposure to Ryan Blaney, not going to lie, may not be that angry that Christopher Bell isn't one of the drivers in the Final Four this weekend.
Absolutely. As someone that does have Chris Bell, albeit much smaller than my Ryan Blaney exposure, I was sitting there going, I don't know what I want to have happen. Do I want Chris Bell in here for kind of a break even or make a crumb driver? Or do I want a William Byron, who I don't think is going to be a real or as much of a contender, with Ryan Blaney? So it was a very difficult spot for me to be in. I was fielding texts and messages the entire time. Like, what do we want? What do we want? I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, do you want to have a Chris Bell, kind of a break even guy there? Or do you want Ryan Blaney to be the clear favorite and you can hedge when the numbers came out? So I do think that the odds, they got him right for the most part. We're seeing Ryan Blaney as the heavy favorite. He hasn't qualified necessarily as well as I would thought he would have these last 2 races. Hopefully he looks strong enough in practice and we're going to be able to maybe make a move to hedge a little bit. But ultimately we won't know until after practice and qualifying.
Yeah, and we'll break down some of those odds in stage 2. But I guess the overarching question I have for you, did NASCAR make the right call, in your opinion, penalizing Christopher Bell for safety protocol or whatever we're calling it for the Ross Chastain Hail Melon move? And when we saw that race, what I was amazed by in watching practice, you and I, of course, going back and forth, that everybody wanted to talk about the 19, whether it was nostalgia or trying to make a case for Truex to go out there and win a race in what'll be his final season, or is, I should say. The 12 never really got mentioned. And I think both you and I were a little bit surprised when we saw what the price was on the 12, because you dig into some of that long run speed. And credit to NASCAR, the softer tire created a little bit of the drama that we needed, that you could stay out or you could grab fresh tires that did give you a competitive advantage. But I was as surprised as anybody that Blaney went off at 6-1 before they dropped the green flag on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. I just want to start with, did NASCAR get it right? I think they made the easy call. Once Bell got into the wall and stayed in the gas, it's so easy for them to just make that call and say, hey, you know what? We can't do this anymore. That's a safety issue. Whenever safety's brought in, that's an easy call for NASCAR. What would have been a very different call, or an interesting one, would have been if he was able to peel his ass off the wall and then actually finish ahead of the 23 car, end up tied with William Byron, and move on. And gosh,
you didn't like the bow tie convoy paving the way, like a couple of lead blockers to get the 24 in position to be on the right side of any potential tie-breaking scenario?
Fortunately for me, I had a very small card coming into this weekend, but I could imagine if you had backed the one in some sort of matchup, or all of a sudden team orders are affecting the outcome, which is absolutely what happened, right?
Yep.
You can't hide behind the audio. Okay. The audio makes you look more guilty. So that also is kind of something we need to think about next year. Does NASCAR make changes so this can't happen? Or do we need to take this into account when betting these cutoff races? Because
man, it's so tough to try and do that. I mean, we've talked about this at going to road courses and trying to identify, okay, who's going to be out there racing for stage points? Who's going to be out there trying to chase the win? I'm not sure if sometimes you create paralysis by analysis, and if anything, you end up eliminating good bets from your card or your portfolio each week. Sure. If you're trying to overthink some of the scenarios that could play out. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and this is what we do. We'll bounce ideas off each other, but curious to get your take.
Yeah, the paralysis by analysis thing. I think when it comes to these later races, my card has been smaller when it comes to outrights, and or smaller when it comes to head-to-head matchups, but heavier on outrights. If you are going to take a little bit of risk in these races, you want to make sure that you're paid properly. And if you don't know whether there's going to be team orders, or you're not quite sure how things are going to stack up, or a particular driver that can run second ultimately and still advance, you want to make sure that you're paid properly in that outright. So I've been leaning more towards these outright prices when it comes to the later parts of the NASCAR season. We were very heavy on Bell at Vegas, which unfortunately didn't work out. Then we were heavy on Blaney at Homestead, also didn't work out, but it did, come home this week for us when we were very heavy on Blaney. If you want to go back and look and say, well, if Blaney wins Homestead, does he do the same thing here at Martinsville? No, probably not. But I would have been much heavier on Chase in that scenario, who ultimately came in second place. We won't know what's going to happen, with this 9 car coming this week. I think he's a tough guy to handicap, but you don't want paralysis by analysis, but it is important to note that could happen. If you were a Bubba Wallace backer, and I don't think that probably affected any bets, but it certainly could have. And you just want to kind of make a mental note of that before you get very decisive in making your final plays or a cutoff race like Martinsville.
I appreciate you talking me off of a blind fade of the 19 card, by the way, though. I will be sending you an invoice for that.
Okay, can we talk about this?
When you tell me, hey, look, there's a guy, if he gets shuffled back in the field, he's not going to drive through. Hey, look, what happened to the 19?
Okay, does anyone... We are live, and so I'm going to take advantage of this. I'm going to ask the people that are watching this live, why did Martin Truex Jr. try to break up stage 1? Was he just gifting Denny Hamlin a spot? There was I never even in my wildest dreams thought that after 60 laps or 50 laps, whenever Martin Truex Jr. pitted, that would be the decision or at least a race winning strategy. So to me, that looked like he just pitted to give Denny Hamlin a spot. I don't know. Am I wrong about this? But I'm curious to see what the comments will bring. Ultimately, Truex, once he pitted, I was like, oh no, Todd wanted to fade him. And here I am saying, I don't know. I feel like he could stay out front. I'm afraid to do it. And then as soon as he pitted, then he sped on pit road. His day was completely over. And we never saw saw him on the lead lap the rest of the day.
The 19 became an afterthought, much like Ty Gibbs. And unfortunately, those drivers commanding a ton of respect in the markets, at least throughout the course of the playoffs, because they have shown raw speed. They just haven't been able to put it together. But we'll put a bow on stage one. I think we've done enough damage there, so we'll wave the green, white checkered flag. Encourage all of you guys and girls out there to follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me on social. But most importantly, for all things Bet the Board related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Most importantly, because as NASCAR season winds down, plenty of college football and NFL action to keep your money in a plus EV situation. So, Worm, as we go into stage two and we look at the overall snapshot of the championship four, 312 miles, a 1 mile flat desert oval, your de facto home track, although I know you claim Michigan. I'll let you claim both of them because I'm that kind of magnanimous personality. Since stage racing began in 2017, 36 different drivers have participated in the 10-race postseason competition that culminates in the finale on Sunday. Tyler Reddick comes in most inexperienced of the quartet, but of course, Tyler Reddick performed well in the Xfinity series. And, you believe Denny Hamlin, and we have no reason not to. This guy's a generational talent, so the moment won't be too big for him. So we'll just rattle off some of the consensus numbers that are out there. You mentioned at the top, Blaney is kind of the favorite. Do shop around as always, 2-1, the prevailing price. Then it's William Byron at plus 265. You're looking at Tyler Reddick in that 7-2 range, and we'll call Joey Logano 7-2 as well for argument's sake. And as you try and dig into some of the numbers, for Ryan Blaney, recent results at Phoenix, it's not quite Kevin Harvick-esque, but he doesn't get, in my opinion, nearly the respect in the odds market as his finishes suggest. Fifth, second, fourth, and fourth. And last year in the fall, if he had to win the race, maybe there's a chance he can go out there and catch the one. He just didn't need to. That wasn't his primary competition. And he's done it in the last two races, starting outside the top 10. 16th in the spring, started the championship race last year at 15th. 8 straight races here with a driver rating of 100 plus. And we'll get into the potential hedge scenarios and what some of our listeners should do. But are you willing to make a case for William Byron in a de facto group bet? And I want to specify, it's not to win the race. We're just looking at the group prices right now for Ryan Blaney actually offering value and upside at 2-1.
Yeah, I would say based on long run speed, where obviously Blaney has struggled when it comes to qualifying the last couple times that they've been here to Phoenix. I feel like that's why you're seeing William Byron be priced at this plus 265 number. I think if you don't have any Ryan Blaney this week, this is probably the point where you should enter the market on him. I think that, I don't think Ross Chastain or a non-playoff driver does win the race this week unless it's Chris Bell. So if that's the case, I would much rather have Ryan Blaney at that 2-1 price than I would rather have him at the 3-1 to win the race price. So if you don't have anybody in the playoffs and you're thinking about entering just the championship market or even the outright market to win the race, I still think this Blaney at 2-1. I think there's very few books that still have 2-1. I think a lot of them are going to be around that plus 175 price. I don't hate this at all unless you're going to get a live price. And I don't know that books are doing championship live prices. They might do live odds to win the race, but I can't imagine it's going to be a championship price. So yeah, I do like Ryan Blaney. His average finish is third at this track over the last 5 races here.
Pretty damn impressive.
It's been phenomenal. I know he hasn't won the race, but if you look back when Logano won 2 years ago, he was just being a blocker. He was way faster than Logano. He was able to drive by Briscoe, by Chastain, and just essentially he would have driven by Joey Logano had it not been the championship race. The fastest car there last year, starting 15th. I don't think there was any question kind of throughout the entire day. There was one car that was constantly moving forward after every restart, especially in the long run. It was the 12 car. It didn't matter if he slipped up on pit road, which he did multiple times. He was still able to work his way forward. I anticipate more of the same when it comes to Ryan Blaney this week at Phoenix.
When we look at the 24 of William Byron, we mentioned 5-2, some slightly better prices that are out there. We can start with his Phoenix history. Came home 18th in the spring, wasn't great. 4th here last year in the fall, won the spring race back in 2023, and it's 6th, 18th, and 17th But the one common denominator for the 24 is he's performed exceptionally well from a qualifying perspective. Hasn't started any of the last 5 races worse than 8th. And I think that's always important when we try and identify market entry versus practice. What's interesting, though, about William Byron, I mean, just like last year, he comes into Phoenix as the only driver in the Final Four who didn't win a race in the round of 8, pointed his way in again. And as you go through William Byron's resume this season, we have to go all the way back to April 7th for the last time that we found the 24 driving himself into victory lane as the truly fastest car. Now, the one thing I will give the 24 credit for, he doesn't beat himself. And I found this number absolutely outstanding from NBC Sports NASCAR. They did a great preview article. He's gone a series best 59 consecutive races without a pit road speeding penalty. In a race of this magnitude, the last thing you want to do is beat yourself. But do you feel on raw speed alone, William Byron warrants a bet at this price?
Raw speed in the short run, yes. When it comes to the price on his long run speed, no. Here's the question. Do we end up with a long run feel at Phoenix? I think the answer to that question is yes. If that is the case, I do think that the 12 car and Ryan Blaney will be faster, just like we saw last week at Martinsville. Byron was able to lead laps. He was able to compete up there with the 5 and the 24, 5 and the 9. I thought that they were kind of the 3 fastest cars in the short run. It wasn't until 30 or 40 laps to where this 12 car was able to make passes. I expect more of the same. Byron has qualified exceptionally well here. His average starting spot over the last 5 races is 4.0. That is top of the leaderboard when it comes to average qualifying position. I anticipate more of the same. If we see a lot of short runs, I could see the 24 staying up there a long time, but it also depends on where the 20 or the 12 qualifies. If the 12 qualifies deep, maybe this plus 265 is the best number we'll see leading into the race. However, if odds makers are looking at the long run, I cannot see Byron staying at this plus 265 number. I think we'll see that bump up just a little bit, especially if Reddick qualifies well, and also Ryan Blaney if he qualifies well.
Well, you mentioned Tyler Reddick, and qualifying has not exactly been his forte. The only time he started better than 6 was in the spring. And this is a driver that we talked about as the model of consistency all summer long. Tyler Reddick, you could rinse and repeat him as a top 10 bet that you didn't matter what track we were going to. If it was a road course, if it was a mile and a half, if it was a short flat track, the 45 is going to put his best foot forward. Hasn't been the case, though, throughout the course of the playoffs. One of the few drivers whose average finish during the regular season is actually better than what we've seen in the playoffs. Yeah. But he does have that knack for the dramatic. We saw it on full display at Homestead, pulled a move that I don't think Ryan Blaney or Denny Hamlin thought he could try and execute. Tyler Reddick in that 7-2 range right now. I mean, he finished 10th here in the spring, higher than any of his competitors this past weekend. In that particular race. But I'm not sure this offers me enough upside for the 45 to go to the window and feel confident that he's going to put together a great practice session. They're going to make the right adjustments, and he's going to start inside the top 3, which I would need for this price to make sense from a pre-week perspective.
We have an unnamed person on the chat right now who is the biggest Red Dog fan you could ever imagine. And he will back this guy no matter what. He's even saying stuff as crazy as, I think if the 45 had clean air, he could have competed with Chris Bell in the spring. No, he couldn't. This shows that some of these people...
It's better than saying he thought the 45 could have competed at Martinsville, because I'm pretty sure the 45 didn't even have to show up to the paperclip last weekend, and it would have been as productive a Sunday for him.
Yeah, the thing with here's why I think Reddick, you're finding him the 3rd favorite and not the 2nd favorite. I do think that he was the 2nd best car in the spring here, and it wasn't close to Chris Bell. I think it was not even the same zip code. Where Reddick has struggled is just his consistency. Can Reddick go out there on a final restart and win the championship? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if you just put all the drivers in one car or in the same car, and someone had to make something stick, I would say that these 2 higher odds drivers in Reddick in the 45 and Joey Logano in the 22 are the 2 drivers that I would want my money on. However, we don't know if there's going to be a late race restart. You actually have to run the entire race. You can't make mistakes. This is the big leagues. This is the championship race where if you make one mistake, you're out of here. And Tyler Reddick, in my opinion, has just made too many little mistakes throughout the entire season. I think that's why he's priced as a 3rd favorite and not the 2nd favorite. I think his car will be good. But when he gets desperate, I do think that he does tend to make mistakes, whether it's on pit road or whether it's a driving mistake where he could find himself losing a few spots, whether it's a restart or just long run speed, burning his stuff up too early. That's why I think he's kind of in this higher, mid, plus 350 range.
So this is where things really start to get interesting. We've talked about three drivers that have a little bit of pedigree. Ryan Blaney, of course, the defending champion, William Byron and Tyler Reddick trying to break through, and 23XI deserves a ton of credit for putting a driver into the Final Four in only its fourth full season of racing. But here's Joey Logano. Already has 2 championships to his credit. And when you trying to identify the 22, you look at some of the results. Spring at Phoenix, qualified 23rd, never rose higher than 19th, crashed out on lap 203, was an afterthought in the conversation. Recent results at Phoenix, the 34th in the spring, 18th, 11th. He did finish first when he won the title, finished 8th. Qualifying-wise, he put it on the pole when he went on to win the race for the championship. Career at Phoenix, 31 starts, 3 wins, 8 top 5, 16 top 10s. But with the sweet comes the sour. And after 35 races so far this season, I mean, Logano has only 6 top 5 finishes and 12 top 10 finishes. He also has the most finishes of any of the Final Four drivers outside the top 20. I mean, handicapping this guy has been one of the biggest challenges you are going to find in the entire Cup Series. Credit Logano and his crew chief, Paul Wolfe, for being opportunistic and being able to give him a seat at the table under the most improbable of circumstances, with Alex Bowman getting disqualified. But Werme, if you're going to ask me to have a strong stance on the 22 before we see the cars on track for practice, especially at a number this short at 3.5 to 1, I got absolutely nothing for you. And I know it's not what our listeners want to hear.
Yeah, this Logano number, hopefully you got the 14 to 1, kind of early in this round when they weren't quite sure if he was going to make it into the playoffs or the final race. I'm just trying to figure out a world where the 22 is faster than the 12. Like, I just don't see it.
Do we think, well, okay, the question I'll ask then, and you know a little bit more about this, and we could throw it out. I'm sure some of our listeners have. Well, I'm not going to tell listeners what you sent me about 12 minutes before we went live. We'll save that for later in the program. Okay. But look, Joey Logano's had an extra couple weeks. He's raced relatively stress-free, knowing that he was already going to be in Phoenix. How do we build that in? I mean, we talk about situational advantages all the time in scheduling spots when we're handicapping traditional stick and ball sports. Do we feel that gives Logano an edge? Do we feel the momentum that Blaney has had? And how Team Penske has to divide and conquer for 2 teams. But the one thing I continue to hear from the NASCAR community over and over again, that if there's one race team that's great about sharing information amongst its drivers, it's what goes on at Team Penske.
Yes, I will say that there is, anecdotal evidence when the last time that the 22 team won at Las Vegas and punched their ticket to Phoenix, they went on to win the race. But remember, they qualified well, stayed up front all day, and they had the 12 blocking. So the 12 obviously was not in the Final Four. They did not prep the 12 car 3 weeks in advance. I'm sure that they shared some of that information, but I can't imagine Roger Penske telling the 22 team that they can't share what they've learned in their setups for the 22. They can't share that with the 12. So I think that, I think it's important, but you're looking at it's happened one time with the 22. Oh, they had 3 weeks to prepare or 2 weeks to prepare. Kyle Larson also had that same issue or same thing last year. And as soon as they unloaded, Cliff Daniels said to Kyle Larson, we are off of the 12. And so just because it happened one time does not mean that that's necessarily the reason for why the 22 won the championship. I think the 22 was great on pit road and qualified well. Those are really important, by the way. And they didn't make any mistakes. And they also had a teammate that was a rocket that was able to help them essentially win the championship. And this same teammate was also blocking at Las Vegas when Chris Bell was coming fast on new tires, and the 22 was staying out, trying to make it on fuel. So, yes, I understand. Listen, this is Joey Logano. You put him in a late race restart. I'll take him all the time. If you give him track position, hey, keep this track position. You're at a tire disadvantage. That's okay. I'm okay with Joey Logano being on 25 lap tires or maybe right sides only, and he needs to protect that spot to win a championship. There's no one I'd rather have in the Final Four in that situation. So although Logano might not have the speed, in this 22 relative to some of these other teams, like the 45 and the 12. In my opinion, you can put him in uncomfortable situations. He's been there. He's a 2-time champion. If there's a guy that you just say, hey, go win. I put you in a spot. It's not the greatest spot, but it's our only chance. If you put Joey Logano in that spot, there's a good chance he comes back with that checkered flag.
When you look at the 22, do you think this is the kind of track he'll be able to steal track position if he doesn't have the raw speed to give him a puncher's chance late in the race?
Ooh, I think that's a great question, and I don't think that there is a chance. We're looking at having a softer tire here this year, or in this race. I think tires matter.
Softer tire, by the way. It's a softer tire, by the way, that Joey Logano went out and took care of business at North Wilkesboro that we've seen Team Penske race extremely well with throughout the season.
Yeah, I just where have we seen speed out of Logano where it's just been the fastest car? That's my only thing. And
I mean, they may just turn the entire car into the world's largest fuel cell, and then it's impossible to handicap.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, he could pit one less time. If it just stays green the entire time, maybe he's able to just but there's certain scenarios where let's just say that they are the 4th best car, which is kind of what I anticipate. And there's a long green flag run to the finish. Maybe they stay out an extra 30 laps instead of breaking that up into, 1 run or 2 runs, excuse me. They just stay out longer, and they're able to kind of just put their driver in a position to win the race. I don't know that if there's a caution that there's anything that they can do. Maybe if you run 10 laps and the leaders stay out, they could go pit and take tires and have him be the aggressor. I don't think that's going to work. I think what they're going to need to do is get him the track position. I don't know how or if that's even possible, but I think him holding on to track position is better than him being the aggressor. I still think if you get the 12 out front, even if he has 15 lap older tires, I don't think the 22 catches him. So there has to be a scenario where he steals a track position. He's protecting, making that car wide. I don't think he can be the aggressor and win the championship.
That's fair. It's a good way to look at it as we kind of break down the 4 championship entrants with some of the prices that are there. And again, I'm not going to call this a best bet, but if you're looking at those numbers now and someone's coming in, they want a little bit of action in this particular, we'll call it a group bet because that's essentially what it is. Ryan Blaney at 2-1 offer you the most upside.
I'm sorry, say it again. I was reading a comment. Someone about a hair. Someone who's got the better hairline, Chris or Todd? That's the
mine continues to recede, and this might be the best hairline we see from you until you become a parent, in the span of the next 7 to 10 days. So your hair might start to go out the window. You might look a little bit more Albert Einstein-esque. But no, the question was, if you're looking at it from a championship standpoint, and if we're just identifying these 4 drivers, I know we've broken them down. Blaney, in your opinion, offer the most upside and opportunity at 2-1 if someone just wants a nibble and a little bit of a sweat in this championship group?
Yeah, yes, and probably Reddick. Just because Reddick, that plus 340 number, Byron's about as short as I think you're going to see. And so I do think that there's some upside with Reddick. He was the 2nd best car here, albeit a distant second to Chris Bell. I do think that that maybe there's a little bit of value there, but ultimately, if you just you have one unit that you just want to play on, one driver, I would definitely say that at that 2-1 price on Ryan Blaney is where I would put that money.
Fair, and that's all we were looking for as we wave the green, white, checkered flag on stage 2. Again, follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there. And for all things Bet the Board podcast related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. So stage 3, just want to be upfront. This is all odds to win the race. So make sure, and we can't stress this enough, if you're going to your books and you're betting to win the championship or to win the race, make sure you're reading the fine print. The prices will vary, and the odds will be a little bit longer in this particular market to win the race. So no sense rehashing the 4 drivers that we already brought up. We may as well dive into some of the other guys that could upset the apple cart or spoil the party, whatever the hell cliche you want to use. And the most logical place to start would, of course, be with Christopher Bell. I've seen his number as short as 4-1, upwards of 9-2. Full disclosure here, if Christopher Bell was one of the 4 championship drivers, there's a very good chance we're talking about him at 2-1 or 5-2. Yeah. So there is upside and opportunity just in the number alone. Bell won here at Phoenix back in March, 14 top 5s on his resume, 22 top 10s, and he's led over 1,000 laps. But is this enough of a price to get you to the window early in the week on the 20 if he wants to basically give all of NASCAR one great big shit burger to eat, go out there and grab the checkered flag?
Yeah, my buy price was 7-1 just because you don't know how Chris Bell is going to react, or how the 20 team or JGR in general, not having a car. I know that the 45, you'd consider a very close teammate or a 1B teammate. A little too short for me. I'd rather see practice and qualifying, because I do think that the 12 is going to unload fast, and I do think that they're going to stay the favorite for the race. So if you do have the 12 looking fast in practice, Chris Bell is going to have to look a lot faster in order to see that 9-2 price shorten up anymore. So although I did like if he did open at that 7-1 price, I would have liked him. Unfortunately, books were sharp enough to open this shorter. It'll be interesting to see. This car was so fast. Going back and watching this race from earlier in the year, I mean, he drove from 10th all the way up to first in stage 2, and then from 22nd in the final stage. Very impressive stuff out of this 20 team. And then he continued it all year at every short track. So it wasn't like Phoenix was just this outlier. It was every single track, whether it was Richmond. I know he didn't get wins at these places, but he still showed fast lap times, whether it was early in the run or late in the run. I think Chris Bell, I'd like to see Chris Bell be up there and mix it up, or certainly a non-playoff driver mix it up, because then we're going to get paid a little bit. Whether that's Chris Bell, it looks like it could be, but I ultimately don't know what that 20 team's going to look like after kind of that devastating, beat that they took at Martinsville.
So you always remind me, and you remind the listeners and everyone who watches the pre-race poll, that you know more than just about anybody when it comes to NASCAR and odds. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you remember a scenario since we've gone to stage racing starting back in 2017 where the favorite to win at Phoenix or Homestead, for that matter, was a non-championship Ford driver?
No.
So what would it take for Bell to go off as a shorter shot than, say, Ryan Blaney? Sitting on the pole and just dusting everybody? Or is it a scenario that's completely implausible?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I don't, and this is not on our sheet. This is why I'm thinking here. This is a unsolicited
and for those folks who get to watch Werme think here, it's one of the most uncomfortable experiences there is, since he can hem and haw, or we can filibuster all we want. So I'll let you think about that for a second. I'll let you think about that, and we'll rattle off some of the other drivers that we're looking at prices that you normally wouldn't see at Phoenix if it wasn't a championship race. And we can start with Kyle Larson, widely available in that 12-1, upwards of 14-1. Recent form at Phoenix for the 5 car, 14th, 3rd, 4th, 9th, 34th, and 1st. 17th, where he qualified in the spring, is the outlier. I mean, other than that, he has consistently been inside the top 7, and we know what the 5 has been able to accomplish all season long. Ross Chastain, similarly priced in that 60-1 range thereabouts. I mean, recent races at Phoenix, 6th, 1st, 24th, 3rd, and 2nd. Quietly has been one of the most consistent drivers when we go to the Desert Mile. Starting positions, though, haven't been great. So maybe there's an opportunity to get Chastain post-practice and qualifying, and his driver rating is over 100 in just 2 of the last 5 trips. And then there's a guy like Denny Hamlin, 18-1. It was a great question that Kyle Robert asked on social media last week when we talked about Hamlin. It was nice to have the potential to have a long shot price at 20 or 25-1 for Hamlin. You knew you could earn off of, but I still couldn't make the case going into Martinsville, if he was one of the final 4 drivers, that he could actually go out there and win. So for me, I'm drawing a line through Denny Hamlin at 18-1 from an outright standpoint, but Kyle Larson, Ross Chastain, I mean, either of those guys at all interesting, knowing that you're getting a discount essentially in the outright market because they're not in the final 4.
I like Ross Chastain more than I like Kyle Larson. And, Kyle Larson last year in the championship wins Las Vegas and does have the 3 weeks to prepare for Phoenix. Qualifies okay, but long run speed just wasn't there. And I think that that's the same thing for the 24 car. Yes, they're great in the short run. They're good for 40 or 50 laps, but Kevin Harvick, someone who hadn't really been in the mix at all at last year, was able to run the 24 down and lead laps. So I will say this, I do think the Hendrick cars will qualify well, but they don't have that long run speed. Ross Chastain was able to work his way up. I think he started right around 10th. Last year at this race, was able to work his way up in hang on over the long run. That's why I like Ross Chastain a little bit more than Kyle Larson. Now, could Kyle Larson's numbers shorten up a little bit? Absolutely. I do think that he could qualify well in lead laps for sure. Again, it's weird not seeing Kyle Larson in the Final Four. Like it's kind of when Brian texted me earlier today and said, "Oh man, how am I not betting Kyle Larson at 14-1 at Phoenix?" And gosh, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. Normally, you think of Kyle Larson in that plus 350 at the very highest to win this race because he's racing for a championship. And you just imagine this team's going to qualify well. They're not going to make a ton of mistakes. And you know that Larson's going to get the most out of his race car. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with him not in this Final Four. So I do like Chastain a little bit more at this 16-1 price. God, it's sneaky good here. Sneaky good. You were texting me earlier a few matchups where you thought that there was some value on Chastain, and I thought I figured he'd be overvalued based on he was the only driver in the 10 years to not be in the championship four and win the race. And so I kind of figured he'd just be overvalued until you actually dig into these numbers. I mean, impressive finishes for Ross Chastain. Not impressive starting spots. His average start is about 13.6, but his average finish is second best at 7.2. And that's a 2, a second, a third, a first, a sixth, and then you have an outlier that's the 24. So I do think that Chastain presents a little bit of value. When it comes to Denny Hamlin, I don't see much. It was early in the year where he had run well. If he was going to show speed at all, it would have been at Martinsville. And he was just a tick off from the Hendrick cars and certainly a tick off from Ryan Blaney. Phoenix has just not been Denny Hamlin's place or his playground at all. If anything, it's been quite the opposite. He tends to qualify with a high beta. We've seen him qualify second twice at first, but also he has a 21st in there as well with a 6. So I think Denny Hamlin, his number might shorten up, but I don't think he's a legit shot or a legit contender to win the race, if that makes sense. So if you think he's going to qualify well, and I do think he'll qualify okay. If you want Denny Hamlin on your card, maybe this 18-1 price to win is where you want to put some of those dollars. But gosh, I just don't see him getting it done. I would look maybe top 5 or top 10 markets versus the outright market. And I've thought about it. I do not see a world where Chris Bell. Okay, nope. One chance. If Blaney goes to a backup, if Blaney pulls a Hamlin, I do think that Bell could go off as the favorite.
That's fair.
But that's it. I just don't see. I don't see Blaney. Blaney's looked the fastest, almost in practice, the last 6 weeks outside of road courses. So I just don't see a world where Blaney is just off. He hasn't been off anywhere. It's been every short tracks to 1.5 miles. He's been the fastest. So the only way it would be if Blaney somehow needs to go to a backup car.
Nope, that makes a ton of sense. Now, other drivers that we haven't mentioned at long shot prices, I'm not here to have you advocate for, hey, Kyle Busch offers a ton of upside so he can keep his winning streak alive in his final race of the season at 100-1. I'm not saying that by any stretch, but, Brad K at 30-1, Buescher at 50-1. The one thing I will say, when we look at the way the top 5 market and the top 10 market are priced this week, very similar to super speedways, you may see long shot prices available in the outright market, but the derivatives don't reflect that because they're placing a premium on the championship for drivers. And until some day and age that may come next year or may come 30 years from now, we can bet yes, no's on top 3s, top 5s, and top 10s. You're going to have a level of inefficiency. But anybody else that at least stands out that you go, you know what? I'm not sure he can win the race, but he might be worth a small nibble. Not quite best bet territory, but a top 5 or a top 10 that might be out there.
I don't think it's the Brad Keselowski or the Chris Buescher, although I do think that Brad raced Blaney probably as hard as anybody, although that there are those, Ford manufacturer teammates. I don't see him getting up front because ultimately Brad K, week in and week out, he needs to steal track position in order to find himself up front. It's really difficult to do here at Phoenix. So I don't think Brad Keselowski is that guy. Chris Buescher, he did show a little bit last year. I thought both RFK cars were decent, but again, I would look more to top 5 or top 10 or even, head-to-head matchups. If you're looking to bet these guys, I do think it's going to come down to the championship 4 and maybe 1 or 2 drivers that are, at a little bit shorter odds that have a chance at winning this race. So even though I don't like Chris Keselowski or Kyle Busch in outright markets, maybe we find a matchup on one of those guys. The one driver I will say that I've received the most amount of comments would be Martin Truex Jr. here's where I'm at with Truex. I don't know, man. If I bet on him, he's terrible. If I bet against him, he's amazing. Martin Truex Jr. could go out and run top 4 all day long and make a mistake, or he could be terrible all day long. I just don't know. You bet all sports. There's a team that it doesn't matter. You can't get them right, whether you bet on them or you bet against them. It's like, well,
that team this year in college football, honestly, for some of the Bet the Board podcast overlap listeners, has been Central Florida. Bet on them, they lay an egg and look completely inept. Don't bet them the following week, win games by 35 or 40. So we mentioned the high level of variance that we've seen from Truex. There are no doubt, to your point, plenty of teams that we see in college and pro football, the NHL, whatever sport it may be, that you go, you know what? I'm going to wash my hands of it. Yeah. I'm not going to bet on or against because I don't want to sit here and try and figure it out.
Yeah, I got a message from Ryan Stevens earlier. He said, talk me out of Truex top 10, plus 135. Like I'm a drunken idiot or a drunk trying to go behind the wheel. And you just need to convince me. I go, dude, I don't know. Like it could be the easiest bet. Like, oh, of course, Truex is going to finish in the top 10. You're getting a plus number on this guy. Yes. But he's also the guy where 20 laps in, there's a brake issue and he's behind the wall. I just don't know with this guy. And I find it really hard. And part of doing this for a living is you just have to realize, like, that's just a gamble. I just don't know with Truex. And, if I were to see him look good in practice and still see that number, I might make a chance or might take a little bit of a chance on it. But I can't do that at this point in the week. I'd rather pay minus 120 than plus 135 on a guess. I would rather put more money behind that number. I know it's a little bit more expensive, but for me, that peace of mind, knowing that's a good car and in hearing comments of, oh, hey, I'm very comfortable in this car, knowing that they're confident that if they decide to take a different line or they try to get inside somebody, that they're going to make it stick and make it work. The last thing you want is a driver's like, well, I don't know that we're going to be able to make it stick. Yeah, we're fast on lap times, but we get in traffic. It might be hard to keep on the track. I just don't like that. I'd rather hear some comments. I'd rather see some lap times. So, but it is interesting that it comes down to Truex because people just don't know.
Yeah, no, and look, I don't think Truex knows. I don't think Truex knows after practice and qualifying how things are going to look. But always an interesting discussion because we do see some upside and opportunity there. Again, it's not all that common that we see a non-championship driver go out there and race his way to the checkered flag. But if there is, there's going to be all sorts of opportunity and upside to be found in the betting market. So we'll wave the checkered flag on stage 3 and kind of put a bow on things. Before we get to the best bet, I mean, you have access. I know you've gotten some feedback. Were there any questions or comments that we wanted to get to for folks that we may not have covered before we share some of the matchups that we have our eye on this weekend?
Yeah, I wrote one down because I thought it was a great question. I don't remember who asked it. So if you're seeing me ask your question, say, oh, that was me.
This one comes from Chris in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Yeah. This was any chance that the 20 shares their setup with the 45. That's a great question. And I'd be curious to know the deal. I know that there's that Gibbs has some sort of skin in the game with 23XI Racing, that the more successful they are, the stronger that partnership is, maybe the more money that Gibbs can charge or whatever. But so that was Drake. Drake asked that question. I thought it was a great question. I don't know, because here's the thing. He would have had to have shared that information with the 19, the 54 and the 11, and it still hasn't mattered at any track. I think that the 20, when it comes to this short track package, has just been faster than everyone else. Now, the question is does the championship mean that they peel back the curtain even more? I just don't know that.
I'm not sure that's the case. But again, this is a little bit more inside baseball and things that are slightly above my pay grade. But going above and beyond the race team to share with an OEM, I don't know. I don't know how that's received. So it's interesting. That'd
be one question.
Within the team, I get it. Because I do believe that teams will share setups. And you'll have non-playoff drivers that go out there to potentially test that if they hit on something that they can then translate to a driver vying for a championship.
So the next question is, are you using any comp track data from, earlier in the year? So I think you're getting to the point where I think that there's just so much information when it comes to data on just short tracks in general, whether it's the tire, whatever it may be, that it kind of cancels everything out, right? So it's like if you read every book, everything cancels out. You kind of have to stay in your lane of what you know. And when I went back as I watched obviously the spring race just to get an idea of who was good realistically, not necessarily looking at finishing position, just who was able to make passes, on both the top and the bottom, what happened to the groove. And then I went back and I watched the race from last year, the championship race, just to see the flow of the race. Where were guys taking tires? When were people pitting? How was it that Chastain was able to get that lead? Just so I had a refresher of the flow of the race. I stayed with Phoenix ultimately, but I'm keeping in mind that the short track packages, who was good? Ryan Blaney was good at Iowa, but I don't think that you can overshadow. Kyle Larson was also good at Iowa. Chris Bell was also very good at Iowa. So I think you have the macro view of just a short track package, but ultimately I think it's more important of, hey, these are the 4 drivers in the championship. People are going to race them differently. It's going to be easier for them to get to the front. And it does take a hard-headed guy like Ross Chastain to go out there and win a race like this. So I don't see Denny Hamlin going out there and winning a race like this. I think he wants to just let things kind of play out. But guys like Ross Chastain or drivers, I don't know. I'm trying to think of another driver that I would put in kind of that hard-headed, go out there and win the race and mix it up with the leaders. For the most part, I think that most of the drivers just want to see ultimately the best car out of the 4 win the championship that day.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of them want to go out there and win the race, but I think the last thing any of them want is to be the one responsible for having a negative impact on the championship. So you mentioned Chastain. He had no problem, bumping and banging with Ryan Blaney last year. I'm glad that things didn't end up getting both of those guys wrecked, because it would have been a travesty to try and see that unfold. Yeah. But to your point, I think a lot of these guys understand what's at stake. Yes, they want to win the race, but the last thing they want is to be the butt of a joke because they threw their nose somewhere where it shouldn't have been. So, best bet portion of the program, Wormser, when we look at things, and you know what? I was going to try and discuss, Ryan Blaney and the way people should go about approaching the 12 if they have some exposure, as we kind of tipped our hand that we were going to have a little bit on him going into last week at 20-1 or 25-1. But I think the better place to try and do that would be on your pre-race poll that they can check out on Sunday before the race actually starts. So we'll see how these cars unload. And again, it is a little bit of a tease. So what time can they check that out on Sunday?
Yeah, I'm going to go 9 a.m. Like I said, there's this soap opera called the NFL that I think airs at 10 a.m. Pacific. And so it'll be noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. I'll just kind of stick with that during this NFL TV show now that it's on. So, it'll be 9 a.m. And that's when I think we can actually start to make our hedges. Those of you like us that have Ryan Blaney, if we're going to make a decision on where we should protect a little bit, that's when we'll make that happen. Or whether you get a no price on Ryan Blaney, there are some books that we hopefully we'll post a no price to be able to lay off a little bit if you want. Ultimately, my wife wants a couch, so this Ryan Blaney to win the championship kind of is that couch bet for her at this point. It's her last chance until next year, but it'll be 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern.
I'm pretty sure you should be buying her a couch anyways when she delivers the pride and joy that your household will be welcoming. So if she's out there watching, she's going to get the couch one way or another, whether or not the 12 drives into victory lane. She will be able to sit on a nice couch, hopefully, before Christmas. But best bet scenarios, I mean, we've talked about a bunch, and there are a couple of matchups that are available at national books that we've discussed that a lot of our listeners will have access to, and a couple of them that are only available here in Nevada. So quite frankly, I don't care where I bet them. But it's up to you, as we kind of gone through some of the drivers we thought were undervalued from a championship standpoint. Look, I don't think any of the 4 drivers that are in the championship 4 offer value for or against the way they're currently being priced. But it's that secondary group of drivers that I do think offers a little bit of upside. I know we have gone back and forth in it, so I'll give you the opportunity if we want to bet them both, if we want to bet just one of them, or how we want to try and approach this particular option. Because as soon as you tip your hand, then market's going to start to move.
Yeah, I know.
We have a lot of loyal listeners in a different capacity watching live than when we just drop the podcast on Friday and we wait till the show goes live, that have itchy trigger fingers and want to make sure they get a little bit of CLV.
Yeah, so I even though that this guy has qualified well at Phoenix, I think that the air is out of his sails. I think his head's actually going to be elsewhere as a team owner. We're going to go with Kyle Larson over Denny Hamlin. That's minus 110. Where did you say that was, by the way?
So it is minus 110 at Westgate. It is now minus 120 at Caesars, where I will bet it right as we speak. So we're going to do that live.
If you have access to Caesars, hurry.
We got the infamous Wheel of Death. There you go.
Perfect. Okay.
So we got the spin. So we'll see exactly what happens there. I will also try and bet it at Westgate now, where there is no Wheel of Death. So as I scroll through and try and identify it. There we go. We'll at least get it in at one shop, and we'll see what the rebuttal offer looks like. So
I think, could you imagine? Do you think
we are at least in for part of our action at Westgate now at minus $1.10? So
okay. So I'll ask you a question. Do you think Denny Hamlin would rather win the race or see the 45 hoist?
We're still spinning. We're still spinning, by the way. There we go. So we're still spinning.
Oh yeah. Everyone thinks it's easy to get these. To get bets out, it is hard. I don't have,
especially in NASCAR.
Here.
What was the question on Hamlin?
Would you rather see him win would Denny Hamlin rather win the race or see the 45 win the championship?
I think he would rather see the 45 win the championship.
I do too.
Is what my feeling is on that. And the reason I say that is Denny is still a racer at heart, but I think his legacy in this sport will be some of the change he is able to enact. Yeah. And there will be no better way for him when he goes to the courts and this nonsensical situation with the charters play out. If the 45 has won the championship and suddenly it's not guaranteed a spot on the grid every single race, that we're talking about the 45 as an open car that may not qualify in a given week if they happen to run it into the wall or have to go to a backup car or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so it looks like that moved to minus 140. Don't play the minus 140 if you can get in on something a little less than that. And it could have been, by the way, not just Todd. I'm sure other people were betting that at the moment. But I do want to talk about the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad you brought that up.
My what an idiot this weekend is Christian Eckes. I cannot tell you how dumb. Okay, as I had Christian Eckes, and I only had Christian Eckes this week. I thought he had the fastest truck. But sometimes that just doesn't work. Okay, so it's that bet is minus 125 at DraftKings if you still want to get that. So Larson over Hamlin, go ahead and play that. The Christian Eckes wrecking Taylor Gray to win, not wrecking. Now he moved him and then he moved Ben Rhodes. As a bettor, am I happy that I had Christian Eckes? Yes, I am very happy. But this was not thinking through anything. Would you rather have Ty Majeski racing you at Phoenix, or would you rather have Taylor Gray? Sorry, you want Taylor Gray racing you. So this was the opportunity. I've said it. I've tweeted this out. Who would you rather have? Like, if let's just say Reddick was winning, or someone, you find yourself in a situation where if you let someone else win, that they would advance. Let's just say it was, in a scenario this week where let's say Tyler Reddick was winning at Martinsville and, Kyle Larson was going to advance to Phoenix if he won the race, or he could pull over and let Denny Hamlin beat him and then move on. You want Denny Hamlin at Phoenix. I don't think he's a threat to win. So we find ourselves in this situation. The Truck Series, Christian Eckes just threw that out the window. And now he has to race against Ty Majeski, who's been great at short tracks this year. Ultimately, what an idiot, because he didn't need to win to get in. He had already moved on. I thought that was a big mistake by Christian Eckes. Ultimately, I think Corey Heim goes on to win this championship. I don't think Enfinger shows enough speed on short tracks. If there were more tire fall off at Phoenix, I would like Enfinger more. But when it comes to speed, that 11 truck has just been incredible. And moving on to the Xfinity Series, the open hand, the kind of half open handed slap that Chandler Smith gave Cole Custer. Kind of embarrassing for those guys. I think
what are they going to do? They need to start putting fighting straps in these guys' fire suits so we can get something, akin to an NHL brawl. Like if these guys want to go, let them go, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, I'll say this. I think Justin Allgaier gets it done. I listen to Allgaier's radio all the time. It is the most positive thing on planet Earth. It's almost annoyingly positive. He's just a guy that's been around for a long time. Denny Hamlin compared him to Mark Martin. I don't know that I'd go quite there yet, but I'm pulling for Justin Allgaier. He is phenomenal at Phoenix, like phenomenal. This is probably his best track. They've showed speed week in and week out. Unfortunately, they just haven't gotten it done. So if there's a team that's been snake bitten all year in any series, it is for sure the 7 team. He'll look good after practice. He'll look good after qualifying. He'll look good during the race. And somehow he just hasn't gotten it done. I anticipate him getting it done. He'll be racing with Cole Custer. We're not quite sure if Chandler Smith is going to take anything out on him. On Cole Custer, Chandler, I can't imagine his career being over in NASCAR. I know that there's a lot of people that are
he's too talented.
He's too talented. I know he doesn't come with money, but he comes with wins. He's got speed. So, I'm pulling for Gator. Hopefully he can get it done. But I guess we'll see. I guess those are my predictions. Just be wary if you're going to bet on Eckes, that Taylor Gray will be, I think, coming for him, or at least all of the Tricon trucks will be racing him a little harder. Just be careful. If you're an Eckes backer, ultimately, if I find myself, or if he looks good in practice, if I find myself on him, I will be hesitant to, pound that number. I might just maybe go a little bit smaller, knowing that there's an outside chance that the 17 truck takes this championship into his own hands and decides to take the 19 out.
Hey, I mean, I know you spend a lot of time with all series. I do mainly Cup. Just because there are only so many hours in the day. But this is no doubt one of the most exciting race weekends of the entire season. So much at stake across all 3 series. It's where champions are born and where stars are found. Maybe not necessarily in the Tailgater series, where sometimes you'll have guys in their late 30s, early 40s that'll never get Cup rides, but at least in the Xfinity series and, of course, for the Cup on Sunday afternoon. So looking forward to it as always. And we know the on-track product, despite some of our disdain for Phoenix, hopefully we get some good racing, and credit NASCAR for changing the tires on all of that. But, Wormser's been fun. I mean, first live show in 2+ seasons of Stay Green. Hopefully our listeners enjoyed it. And for the folks that, won't get a chance to follow this until podcast form on Friday, I want to thank all the guys and girls that have tuned in, that interact with us, that watch your pre-race poll. Hopefully bigger and better things on the horizon for all parties involved as we continue to try and push the envelope forward from a NASCAR gambling content standpoint. And none of this would be possible, first and foremost, without you, our producer, all the support of Bet the Board, but most importantly, the listeners who give us a reason to try and do this, make us smarter with their feedback, and allow us to continue to deep dive these races and pass on some of the information that we're betting ourselves. Even if Lady Luck doesn't always smile upon us, we know we're going to get our money in good. And that's the most important part, trying to get a little bit of CLV and see these things across the finish line. So I'll give you the final word before I bid our listeners a fond farewell in terms of any advice you can offer up to folks going for the final race weekend of the year across NASCAR's top 3 series.
Yeah, just again, another great season. Thanks to you and everybody at Bet the Board. I appreciate it. The fact that we get to talk about this every Wednesday is a lot of fun. I think it makes us smarter, and I think that our feedback also does. Unfortunately, this is one season where I did not make it to a race, the first time in 14 years where I did not make it to a NASCAR race. So
marriage and parenthood slow a guy down. Although I will say we potentially have a standing offer on the table for a race that we don't bet in April. So I'll have you ask for permission from your better half. I'll try and work on permission, but I'm not sure you and I would come back as changed men if we spend a night or 2 on Talladega Boulevard for the spring race down there in Alabama.
I'm also making a push for Homestead next year.
Spring break in South Florida. You want to party with all the college kids down there?
I know. But here's the thing. I want 2 races there, and I would love if there was such a Twitter push from people from all over the country to go to Homestead, that attendance becomes so great that they're like, oh, we need to add another Homestead date. So I know that's, a kind of a pie in the sky goal here, but it's just a great racetrack. I know it's in the middle of nowhere, but maybe we get a trailer, camp in the infield, and spend the weekend watching all 3 series at
the Florida Keys are beautiful if folks are looking to go. The one thing I will say, you may have to carry the torch for all of it. Well, not all of us, but for Bet the Board and for Stay Green, since I believe Homestead happens to fall on the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament as I look at the calendar. So
I've never heard of it, but I'm sure that's a fun weekend for
a man that's got tunnel vision on just one sport. I am envious of the luxury you are afforded when this sport comes to a screeching halt next weekend and you get 3 months to charge the batteries. But again, best of luck to all of our loyal listeners. And for those folks with a little bit of Ryan Blaney exposure, Chris will walk you through some of the machinations and the best way that you can monetize that ticket on Sunday. Once we know who the comers and goers will be, maybe offer up an additional matchup or two. But most importantly, for the final time this season, with a Kyle Larson head-to-head matchup, ticket in hand against Denny Hamlin, we'll see you at the window.